He's the only man in British history to ever be banned from touching people's biceps. And I ain't fucking about. There's only one fella who's ever been banned for sizing up lads' thighs with a tape measure. His full name's a bit of a mouthful to pronounce, so I won't even mug myself off trying. But to the people of the Northwest, he was Purple Aki. 6'5", 22 stone, or 308 pounds for our American listeners. He was built like a brick shithouse, and infamous from Birkenhead to bloody Blackpool. For decades, kids across Merseyside were told, don't stay out after dark, or Purple Aki will get ya. Was he a predator? Was he a raging nonce? A prank? Or just the biggest urban legend Britain's ever seen? Strap yourselves in, cause this ain't some daft playground rumour about a bogeyman lurking behind the bike sheds. This is the story of headlines, hysteria, of courtrooms and chaos, and a man who somehow became a living myth. This, my pedigree chums, is a proper story. So go on, stick the kettle on, will you, Turkish, and get yourself comfy. And while you're at it, do us both a bloody favour and hit that subscribe button double time. Our story begins in Liverpool in the 80s. Perms, mullets, shell suits and more casual racism than a Bernard Manning box set. Toxteth was still smouldering from the riots. Dingle was all tight-knit terraces and tighter fists, and every other scouser was nicking the VCR out of each other's living rooms and the car radio out their dad's escorts. But that ain't all. The footy grounds were war zones in scarves, the cop on one side with Lady Street End on the other, and not a smile between them, unless someone's just been knocked spark out or met our mate Stanley. Brookside was teaching the nation how to be moody in a cul-de-sac, and after scallies you knew were either flogging off knock-off trainers down County Road or practising their getaway routes on their stolen BMXs. It was a rough, loud, brilliantly daft city, and in the middle of all this beautiful chaos, something even madder was lurking in the shadows. You see, whispered about in the playgrounds and back alleys was something else entirely. Not just another scally on the rob, but instead, a big fuck-off monster. And make no mistake, I ain't just talking about some local oddball. To the kids across Merseyside, Aki was the bogeyman, a walking slab of nightmare fuel. The sort of figure you half expect to see stomping through the fog on a stormy night, clutching a dumbbell in each hand. The kind of bloke whose name alone could empty a park after dark. But like most monsters, Aki himself too has his own tragic origin story. Aki was born in 1961 at Crumpshall Hospital in Manchester to a young Nigerian mum trying to get her life started, and a dad who never stuck about long enough to even make it on the birth certificate. By 6 months old, he'd been packed up and fucked off to an orphanage, one of just dozens of kids raised by overworked staff and strict bedtimes instead of a loving family. It's the sort of childhood that leaves you tougher than a prison mattress and half as comforting. And to make things worse, in that world, he stood out, very literally. You see, he didn't just grow up, he grew. And whilst other kids were stretching into hand-me-down jumpers, he was outgrowing fucking door frames. By the time most lads were nicking penny sweets, he looked like he could nick the whole fucking shop. This great big hulk of a kid staring out to the world like it owed him rent, drifting further from everyone around him the bigger he got. Teachers didn't know whether to give him a gold star or a hazard sign. When he was finally old enough to leave care, he tried to blend into normal life, first living in Dingle, the same maze of red brick terraces that gave the world Ringo Starr, then moving into Toxteth, the heart of Liverpool's black community. He took grafting jobs, cleaning the Merseyside tunnels, running errands as a messenger for Liverpool City Council, all whilst trying to slot himself into a world that he didn't really know what to do with, or knew what to do with him. And for all the high-vis jackets and clocking cards, he never really quite fitted in. And bit by bit, the strange obsession that would define him started to creep in. As a young man, whilst most lads were trying to build their own muscles, Aki was fixated on everybody else's. Biceps, quads, calves, you name it. It weren't just curiosity, it was a compulsion. Whilst many his age were busy chatting about girls and football, he'd be quietly sizing up forearms and veins. To him, muscles weren't just flesh, they were very much an obsession. In gyms, he quickly gained a reputation of just appearing behind fellas like a shadow with a tape measure, asking how many reps they were on while they were still gasping for air. One poor bloke said it felt less like small talk and more like being interviewed for a job as he felt his bicep. Most people collect stamps. Aki looked like he was collecting gym memberships. And it weren't just gyms he enjoyed to frequent. You'd find him at footy pitches, bus stops, and even outside chippies, where lads would clock the geezers staring at their arms like they were prize-winning mares at the village fete. Imagine trying to eat your sausage batter while some fella the size of a fucking wardrobe is eyeing up your triceps like he's about to bid on them at Sotheby's. This meant that by the mid-80s, the name Purple Aki was already starting to spread around Merseyside playgrounds like cigarette smoke, whispered with that nervous laugh kids get when they're not sure if it's a joke or a warning. And then came Gary Kelly. 16 years old, tall, athletic, a proper local lad from Birkenhead. He supported Man United and had been scouted by Newcastle, already with a shelf full of football trophies with a baby on the way. His mum and dad described him as level-headed, intelligent and forward-thinking. He should have had his whole life ahead of him at the time, but instead he spent 4 months looking over his shoulder because everywhere he went, Aki was there, waiting at the bus stop, lurking outside his house, following him around the neighbourhood like a shadow no one else could shake. Imagine how terrifying that must have been. 1 minute you're walking home from your footy match, the next minute you've got a bloke the size of a garden fucking shed appearing behind you like the final boss of Birkenhead. But this was just the tip of the iceberg for Aki's dodgy antics. Aki would do research into his victims, confronting them with things like their dad's car registration or their sibling's school. It didn't matter if it was down the shops or just walking the dog. Aki would materialise like some sort of muscular poltergeist, armed with forearms the size of rolled up duvets. It weren't like being chased by a thug, it was like being studied by a very determined wardrobe with questions. And it was never violent, not in the way people expected, but it was relentless. Quote, you'd look round and he'd be there, standing next to you. He could just appear like that, Gary's girlfriend Elaine later said. Every time he walked out the front door, Aki was there, watching, waiting, asking him to tense his legs, squat or flex his calves while looming over poor Gary, measuring, squeezing. In those fateful 4 months being followed by Aki, Gary's personality dramatically changed. From happy-go-lucky to a frightened boy constantly looking over his shoulder. And bit by bit, he stopped being the confident lad everyone knew and turned into someone quietly terrified. And on that June afternoon in 1986 at New Brighton swimming baths, everything was about to change forever. Gary and about 15 mates was messing about like kids do, the smell of chlorine, chips and summer in the air, when someone shouted it. That name. That one thing Gary never wanted to hear again, not out loud, not here. Hearing those words, Gary bolted like his life depended on it. And tragically, it did. He tore through the streets, abandoning his mates, and sprinted to nearby New Brighton station. Witnesses saw him duck into a parked train carriage trying to hide, with his mates in pursuit. Aki stomped onto the platform after him like a man possessed, looking for the poor frightened Gary. And as he made his way through the train, cornered and panicked, Gary tried to slip out the carriage unseen, but unfortunately dropped down onto the live tracks and landed on the live rail, where he was electrocuted and lost his life instantly. Girlfriend Elaine was 3 months pregnant at the time. Their daughter would be born that winter, never knowing her dad, just growing up with stories, old photos and the silence that always seemed to hang over the air whenever his name came up. Aki was dragged into court and tried for manslaughter, with prosecutors arguing that his relentless campaign of harassment had driven Gary to his death. The judge called it one of the most unusual cases he'd ever heard, and when the verdict came back guilty, he landed a stretch of 2.5 years. For a brief moment, people thought it was over. The bogeyman was finally locked away, and the nightmare finished. But of course, it didn't stick. In November 1987, the Court of Appeal tore the whole thing apart, saying that just being there weren't a crime, that his sheer menacing presence, however bone-chilling it might have been, weren't enough to prove assault. And just like that, the bar swung open and Aki walked free. But not just free, he was triumphant. He even won $35,000 in compensation after claiming the whole case had been racially motivated. To the people of Merseyside, this was like watching a horror film villain set up after the end credits. Everyone praying it was over, only to realise the story of Purple Aki was just beginning. From that day on, he stopped being just that strange bloke from Toxteth and became something else entirely. A figure people feared on sight, a living urban legend. He weren't just that geezer anymore from the gym who was obsessed with biceps. To everyone that knew of his terrifying presence, he was Purple Aki, the sort of figure mums would mention to make their kids come home before dark. The bogeyman had just swapped under the bed for Canty Road. He'd crossed that invisible line, no longer just a man, but a story, and stories don't die easy. The 90s rolled in. Britpop was blaring out of every tiny car stereo in the northwest, and Aki, he was busy building his own empire, one bicep at a time. Of course he weren't nicking cars or dealing smack, he was collecting biceps like Pokemon cards. The bigger his frame got, the taller the towels became. Passed from kid to kid like ghost stories ran the campfire, each one swearing they'd seen him down the precinct, eyes locked on some poor sod's triceps like they were gold bullion. And that was the thing, most people didn't even know if he was real or not. To half of Merseyside, Purple Aki was just this daft myth older lads used to say to scare the younger ones. The muscle man of Merseyside, part horror story, part local in joke. You'd laugh it off in daylight, but after dark, every creak behind you made your skin crawl, just in case that legend was actually flesh and blood. But the scale of his endeavours finally came out under Operation Ice, a massive police probe into what they called the systematic campaign of harassment. It was like the coppers were trying to map a ghost. Years of half-whispered sightings, scraps of statements, every lad swearing, "Nah mate, I saw it myself," while the detectives tried to separate schoolyard folklore from actual crimes. They interviewed 123 people, dragging the myth out from under the bed and plonking it straight under the fluorescent light. And what they found was even somehow stranger than the rumours. By 2001, he was hauled before the Liverpool Crown Court facing no fewer than 50 charges of indecent assault and harassment against 14 teenage lads between 1995 and 2000. Judge Edward Slinger told him, quote, "You are a danger to young men and your behaviour is both strange and obsessive," end quote. And he weren't wrong. Aki had the whole routine down to a science. For years, he had rocked up at gyms, rugby pitches, school fields, anywhere where young fellas with decent quads might be hanging about, and launch into these long chats about bodybuilding like he was Arnold Schwarzenegger's Black Scouse cousin. Then came the weird bit. He'd get them standing in a scarecrow pose with their arms out, so he could lift them from behind, feel their arms, measure their thighs, and get them doing squats, all whilst he watched like a scat picking racehorses. Sometimes he'd even clamber on top of them, face down, while they crouched and squatted. This bizarre move, locals ended up calling the inverted piggyback. DC Andrew Rollins told the court, quote, "Arobieke became sexually aroused whilst forcing terrified young men to perform inverted piggybacks, ordering them to squat so he could lean over their backs with his face by their buttocks and his genitalia on their necks, while squeezing their quad muscles," end quote. And if you think that sounds like something out of a fever dream, so did the jury. Was it straight up nonsense? or a pure obsession gone off the rails. Even the courtroom seemed split down the middle, half of them stifling their laughter, the other half staring like they've just been told the Loch Ness Monster was benching 300 kilos behind the leisure centre. They went on to clear him of almost all of the indecent assault charges. The law just couldn't decide if it was sexual, just creepy, or some cursed mix of both. But they nailed him for threatening behaviour, and he copped 30 months back behind bars. Because this weren't just for some random nonsense. When police searched his place, they found what they called a stalker's manual, a proper dossier full of names, addresses, phone numbers, family details, even the exact body measurements of the lads he followed. Like a Panini sticker album, if Panini had been run by the Hannibal fucking Lecter. One victim's family was so terrified they had panic alarms fitted in their houses. The police genuinely thought he might come back to silence his witnesses. One witness from St Helens, who was moved to witness protection programme, stated, quote, "He would turn up everywhere our son went, and knew information about where he lived and details about us and the rest of his family." End quote. This weren't just some lonely weirdo with a gym fetish anymore. This was systematic, calculated, and it terrified whole communities. By 2006, the courts had finally had enough, and after years of Jim lurking, squatting lads, and measuring thighs like he was running crufts for bodybuilders, Merseyside police pulled out the big guns and slapped him with a sexual offences prevention order, the first of its kind in Britain. Imagine being sat in court while a judge says with a straight face, and I quote, "This man is never to fondle quads again," end quote. This order banned him from touching, feeling or measuring anyone's muscles, asking to do squats, talking to anyone under 18 without supervision, entering schools, going to gyms or sports clubs, and even leaving Merseyside without police permission. And did it stop him? Did it fuck? Within months he was back at it, caught in a Preston shopping centre, feeling some bloke's biceps like a posh cunt feeling fruit at Waitrose. Breach after breach, back inside, out again, breach again, back inside, out again. He got jailed in 2008, 2009 and again in 2015 for breaking this order. Prison officers even complained he was asking to measure inmates' arms with shoelaces. It was claimed he was moved 14 times between prisons because of the chaos he caused, though Aki always said it was just because of unfounded allegations made against him. By that point, it felt like the madness would never end, like no matter how many times they locked him up or shuffled in between prisons like a cursed gym trophy, he just kept reappearing, tape measure in hand, and that same cold blank stare on his face. Most blokes come out of prison wanting a pint and a quiet life. Aki came out looking for more quads. It was as if the whole justice system had been trapped in its own endless arms day, trying to restrain a man who simply refused to stop being Purple Aki. After a full decade of this nutty behaviour, a judge finally lifted the SOPO in 2016, saying he deserved a fresh start and could now explore his interest in muscles at appropriate places like bodybuilding shows. Aki called the whole thing a witch hunt, swore blind it had never been sexual and just, and I quote, a lifelong interest in young men, not in a sexual way, end quote. But of course, the tabloids weren't buying it, and neither was anyone else. He spent more of the 2000s banged up than out, and somehow his legend only got bigger. Aki stopped being the name parents whispered to scare their kids and became the punchline of half the internet's darkest jokes. He went from lock up your sons to let's put his face on this pineapple cup. One Liverpool bar started serving a cocktail called the Purple Aki Punch, all rum and Vimto syrup, dished up in a hollowed out pineapple like some cursed tiki offering to the god of glutes. Banners with his mugshot popped up at Glastonbury, quote, Purple Aki, the gym pest from the northwest, end quote, while festival goers posed for selfies under them like he was the fifth Beatle. Even the football terraces got in on it. Everton fans had Purple Aki sits on the cop banners, Liverpool fans had their own chance taking the piss, and he somehow became the only thing that could unite both sides of Merseyside. There were cardboard cutouts of his face at local gyms, and whole YouTube channels cranking out memes about him. Once a figure of pure terror, now a weird sort of local mascot. In 2016, BBC Three aired a documentary called The Man Who Squeezed His Muscles, searching for Purple Aki, talking about his reputation like Alan Partridge explaining a parking fine. Aki absolutely hated the doc. In fact, he filed a complaint to Merseyside police claiming it demonised him and stirred up racial hatred. Police of course binned the complaint, but it showed one thing: he still despised the legend people had made of him. Only in Britain could a man once banned from touching biceps end up immortalised in novelty drinks and football chants. And just like that, the urban legend clocked out. On the 26th of August 2025, Purple Aki was found dead in his flat in Toxteth, 64 years old. Police said the death weren't suspicious, just the quiet end of a very loud life. After decades of headlines, courtrooms, memes and myths, his story ended in silence. Within hours, social media lit up, not with grief exactly, but more with this strange flood of ironic tributes. People posting his mugshot with angel emojis, remixing football chants, even sticking his face on memorial candles like he was a patron saint of quads. It was fucking mental. Half the internet was laughing, half of them quietly unsettled, and all of them fascinated. Because that's what he'd become by the end really. Not just a man, not just a criminal, but something in between. A living myth, the kind of story people pass down just because it's too strange to forget. But now he's gone, carved into British folklore, legend, and sadly, reality. What lessons can we take away from this crazy tale? Don't stalk and harass innocent young people, and never skip leg day.